The ceremonial world of grandeur had been engineered to intimidate. Owen Mitchell knew this because he had read the orientation pamphlet 3 times and still felt intimidated by the font. The sky above the palace shimmered with layered auroras generated by orbital climate rings, each band of color shifting in slow, deliberate waves as if the planet itself were breathing in stately rhythm. The air carried a faint metallic sweetness from the gravity stabilizers embedded beneath the marble courtyards. Even the breeze felt curated. It did not gust, it glided. Inside the Hall of Convergence, gravity had been tuned 2% lighter than standard, just enough to make alien dignitaries from heavier worlds feel at ease, and human staff slightly off balance. Owen suspected this was not an accident. Nothing on Grandeur was accidental. He adjusted the cuffs of his service uniform and reminded himself that he was not here to contemplate planetary psychology. He was here to carry a tray, a very expensive tray. The crystal flutes arranged upon it were not truly crystal, but lattice-grown photon glass, each filled with a pale, luminescent aperitif that shimmered in soft gradients from blue to violet. The drink responded to the drinker's bioelectric field, altering flavor accordingly. To Owen, it tasted faintly of citrus and professional anxiety. The state dinner marked the opening of trade negotiations over gravitic sail technology, devices capable of folding microcurrents in space-time to propel ships without traditional engines. The Concord's most influential species had gathered beneath chandeliers composed of suspended starlight, actual captured stellar plasma contained within elegant magnetic frames. The light hummed softly, like a choir warming its voice, and at the center of it all stood Queen Thea. Owen had seen her before only at a distance, during rehearsals. Up close, she seemed almost entirely human, tall, poised, her dark hair falling in controlled waves over shoulders draped in fabric that shifted texture with her pulse. But there were the ears. Long, elegant, and unmistakable, they curved back from her head in smooth arcs, tapering to subtle points. They moved not dramatically, not theatrically, but with quiet intention. A tilt here, a slight angle there. Among her people, he had been told, those movements conveyed nuance far beyond words. At the moment, her ears were angled in dignified attentiveness as she addressed a Varelian ambassador whose skin shimmered like oil across water. Owen's task was simple: circulate, remain invisible, and do not, under any circumstances, become memorable. He stepped forward as the chamber's floor panels shifted almost imperceptibly, adjusting alignment with Grandeur's orbital axis. The movement was routine. The palace rebalanced itself every 30 minutes to compensate for tidal interactions with the planet's twin moons. Owen had trained for this. Small steps, steady breathing. He navigated past a delegation from the Kethri Dominion, 4 beings sharing a single exoskeletal shell and arguing politely with themselves, then pivoted toward the Queen's retinue. This was the critical pass. Offer the tray, withdraw, evaporate. He felt the condensation before he saw it. A cooling field emitter embedded in the floor had overcompensated for the thermal output of the plasma chandeliers. A thin sheen of moisture glimmered like an innocent suggestion. In lighter gravity, traction behaved differently. His shoe met the surface. The universe considered its options. Owen's foot slid. Time elongated in that peculiar way reserved for disasters and tax audits. The tray lifted from his hands in a graceful, traitorous arc. The photon glass flutes shimmered midair, each containing a tiny galaxy of glowing liquid. Owen attempted to correct his balance. His other foot chose treason. He collided, not with a wall, not with a column of starlight, with the Queen, specifically with the dignified lower portion of her royal person. The impact was not violent. It was thorough. The tray completed its rebellion, tipping forward. For a heartbeat that lasted an epoch, every sentient being in the Hall of Convergence stopped breathing. The photon glass flutes hovered. The anti-spill microfields embedded in their rims activated automatically, suspending droplets in midair like captured rain. Gravity recalibrators hummed in confusion. Somewhere to Owen's left, a Kethri voice whispered, "This is new." Owen, meanwhile, had achieved a position of intimate impropriety with the ruler of an interstellar civilization. He froze. The hall froze. Two members of the Queen's Guard shifted their plasma lances a fraction upward. The sound was subtle, a low ionic whisper. A human diplomat fainted in a manner so quiet it almost deserved applause. Owen's mind supplied helpful thoughts such as, "This is how empires end," and "I wonder if asteroid mining requires previous experience." He pushed himself backward at once, nearly slipping again but managing, through a miracle he would later attribute to every deity available, to regain his footing. The tray clattered to the floor, but the flutes descended gently, guided by their anti-grav systems, settling upright as though nothing catastrophic had occurred. Owen did the only thing a human could do in such circumstances. He attempted to bow, kneel, apologize, and cease existing simultaneously. Your Majesty, I deeply, profoundly, unintentionally," he began, words tripping over one another like panicked rodents fleeing a sinking vessel. Silence pressed in from every direction. He dared not look up. In that suspended instant, he became acutely aware of his heartbeat, of the faint hum of stellar plasma above, of the subtle scent of ionized air. Then he heard something unexpected, a soft intake of breath, not sharp, not outraged, curious. He lifted his gaze a fraction. Queen Thea had turned. Up close, her expression was not fury. It was surprise, yes, but threaded with something else, concern. Her long ears, which had been angled in diplomatic composure moments before, shifted forward slightly. "You appear to be injured," she said. Her voice carried easily across the hall, enhanced by a harmonic resonator beneath her collarbone. It was warm, resonant, and entirely free of impending execution. Owen blinked. "No, Your Majesty. I mean, possibly my dignity, but otherwise intact." A ripple moved through the assembly. It was not quite laughter. It was the sound of hundreds of beings recalculating expectations. Thea's gaze flicked briefly to the condensation on the floor, then back to him. One corner of her mouth curved, not broadly but unmistakably. "Grandeur adjusts its gravity for our guests," she said lightly. "It occasionally forgets that balance is a negotiation." A Varelian ambassador coughed in what might have been amusement or internal, luminescent turbulence. The guards did not lower their weapons, but they did not raise them further. Owen felt heat flood his face. In this reduced gravity, he suspected he might actually float away from embarrassment alone. "I assure you, Majesty," he said, words steadier now, though his knees remained unreliable, "I have no cultural tradition involving collisions." A pause. Then, unexpectedly, a quiet sound escaped the Queen. A laugh. Not the rehearsed, diplomatic version he had heard earlier. This one was smaller, unscripted. Her ears tilted sideways in a gesture he did not yet understand. "Then we shall not adopt one tonight," she replied. The tension fractured. Not entirely, but enough. Conversations resumed in cautious murmurs. The plasma chandeliers hummed on, indifferent to protocol. Thea extended a hand, not imperious, not demanding. "May I see your palm?" she asked. Owen, baffled, complied. She scanned it briefly with a subtle beam emitted from a ring at her finger, checking for fractures. The gesture was efficient, almost clinical. "You are uninjured," she concluded. He swallowed. "Yes, Majesty." Her gaze lingered on his face for a moment longer than protocol required. He realized dimly that she was studying not his uniform, not his posture, but his mortification. It was entirely genuine. He had no training in royal flattery, no calculated deference, only a desperate wish to reverse time and perhaps relocate to another galaxy. Something in her expression shifted again. Less ruler, more observer. "Very well," she said at last, straightening. "Let it be recorded that the human server demonstrated the structural integrity of our anti-spill technology." A few scattered chuckles escaped despite best efforts at composure. Owen exhaled for what felt like the first time in a century. He had not been vaporized, not exiled, not even publicly reprimanded. He had simply bumped into the Alien Queen, and she had laughed. By the time the final course was served, a delicately folded lattice of protein grown in zero gravity, and infused with microbursts of solar spice, the Hall of Convergence had recovered its rhythm. Conversations resumed their layered hum, translators whispered in discreet pulses at collars and wrists, and the plasma chandeliers resumed pretending they had not just illuminated the most socially catastrophic stumble in recent palace history. Owen, however, had not raved. He pushed himself backward at once, nearly slipping again, but managing, covered. He moved through the hall in a state of hyper-awareness, each step placed with the careful deliberation of a man crossing a minefield composed entirely of his own reputation. He avoided looking directly at the queen. He avoided looking at anyone who had seen what had happened. This left him primarily staring at floating floral arrangements engineered to emit polite fragrances, calibrated for multi-species tolerance. He suspected the flowers were judging him. Every so often, a murmur drifted in his direction. Intentional? New human custom? Remarkably bold. One of the Kethri, rotating within their shared exoskeleton, inclined toward him as he passed. Your maneuver, they said in layered harmony, displayed impressive proximity calibration. It was gravity, Owen replied weakly. Ah, they responded, a gravity-based greeting. He made a mental note never to publish a memoir. At the center of the hall, Queen Thea continued her diplomatic orbit. Her gown shifted in subtle patterns of starlit silver as embedded nanofibers responded to ambient electromagnetic fluctuations. Her long ears moved with minute precision, angling back during moments of boredom, forward during interest, flattening slightly when a Virelian envoy attempted a fourth consecutive compliment about her luminal symmetry. Owen noticed these movements now. He could not help it. Once you had collided with someone, it was difficult not to become acutely aware of their existence. He was replenishing a tray near the edge of the hall when a palace aide approached. The aide was tall, armored in ceremonial alloy that shimmered like polished obsidian. A faint holographic sigil hovered near his shoulder, marking him as part of the Queen's inner administrative guard. Server Owen Mitchell, the aide said. It was not a question. Owen briefly considered whether hiding behind the beverage station would constitute treason. Yes, he answered. Her Majesty requests your presence. The words did not echo. They did not need to. Owen felt his stomach perform a complex gravitational maneuver of its own. Around them, a few nearby dignitaries fell conspicuously silent. Someone inhaled sharply. Somewhere in the hall, a translator drone emitted a confused chime. Presence, Owen repeated as if clarifying a technical term. Yes. Immediate presence? The aide's expression did not change. Immediate. Owen set down the tray with exaggerated care. He half expected the floor to liquefy beneath him in dramatic judgment. Instead, it remained stubbornly solid. He followed the aide through a side corridor that unfolded from the main hall like a thought the palace had just decided to think. The architecture shifted subtly as they walked. Walls rippled into new configurations, revealing passages bathed in cool, bioluminescent light. Embedded in the ceiling, constellations rearranged themselves in real time, mapping the current positions of Concorde fleets. Grandeur never stopped calculating. They entered a smaller chamber adjacent to the hall, an antechamber reserved for private consultations. The air here was warmer, less formal. A holographic projection of the planet rotated slowly above a circular table, its twin moons casting precise mathematical shadows. Queen Thea stood alone. Without the full assembly watching, she appeared less monumental. Still regal, yes. Still composed. But the weight of 1,000 observing eyes had lifted. Her ears were angled neutrally when she turned toward him. Leave us, she said to the aide. The aide hesitated for a fraction of a second, protocol adjusting, then bowed and withdrew. The door sealed with a soft, harmonic note. Owen stood very still. I assure you, he began immediately, words tripping over one another in renewed panic. I have no history of physical aggression toward monarchs, or minor nobility, or anyone really. My coordination record prior to tonight was statistically acceptable. Thea raised a hand. He stopped. You believe I summoned you for punishment? She observed. The harmonic undertone in her voice was less pronounced here, more natural. I believe that would be reasonable, he admitted. Her gaze sharpened slightly, not unkindly. Reasonable. Yes, Majesty, I collided with you in a manner that will likely be reenacted in holographic satire for the next century. A faint glimmer of amusement flickered in her eyes. It already has been, she said. Owen blinked. Already? She gestured toward the hovering planetary projection. It flickered and reconfigured, displaying a rapidly spreading stream of palace internal network messages. Animated renditions, mercifully stylized, depicted a tiny human figure sliding dramatically across polished floors. One version included exaggerated sound effects. Speed of information, Thea said mildly. A greater force than gravity. Owen covered his face briefly with his hands. I will never survive this. You are surviving it, she pointed out. He lowered his hands. She studied him in silence for a moment, not with accusation, with curiosity. When you struck me, she said, your first expression was not fear. He frowned. I'm fairly certain it was. No. Her ears tilted forward slightly. It was concern. You were checking whether I had been harmed. Owen opened his mouth, then closed it again. I may have been checking whether I had obliterated diplomatic relations, he offered. That as well, she conceded. But there was no calculation in it. No performance. He shifted uncomfortably. I'm not skilled at performance. That is rare, she replied. She moved closer, not invasively, but enough that he could see the fine iridescent threads woven into her skin, near her temples. Biotechnological enhancements, subtle and precise. The faintest glow pulsed beneath the surface, synchronized with her heartbeat. Most who approach me, she continued, have rehearsed their expressions in advance. Their respect is engineered, their fear curated. I assure you, Owen said quickly, my fear was entirely organic. This time she laughed openly. The sound was brighter than before, echoing softly against the chamber's curved walls. I do not doubt it, she said. Silence settled, but it was no longer oppressive. The holographic planet continued its rotation, indifferent. You are aware, she went on, that certain members of my court expected me to make an example of you. Yes, he said faintly. I assumed the example would be educational. And yet, she said, I did not. No, Majesty. Why do you think that is? Owen hesitated. There were many possible answers, most of them dangerous. Because, he said carefully, if an empire collapses due to one human slipping on condensation, it may have structural concerns. Her ears angled sharply upward in what he was beginning to suspect signaled surprise. Then they tilted slightly to one side. You possess an unexpectedly subversive mind for a server, she said. I assure you, Majesty, it's usually occupied with beverage logistics. She stepped past him, circling slowly, not predatory, evaluative. The gravitic sale negotiations, she said, are fragile. Pride entangles them more tightly than physics. I've noticed, he replied before thinking. She paused. You have? Yes. The Varelians don't want to appear technologically inferior. The Dominion refuses to license without symbolic concessions. Everyone is worried about looking small. And you? She asked. I already look small, he said. It's surprisingly liberating. Another flicker of laughter. She stopped in front of him again. You embarrassed yourself tonight, she said. Yes. You did not attempt to disguise it. No. You did not blame the palace floor. I considered it, he admitted. And yet, I was the one moving. She regarded him thoughtfully. My people, she said after a moment, value precision, control. We design our environments to eliminate unpredictability. I've noticed that too, he said, glancing at the shifting constellations overhead. And yet, she continued, the most authentic moment of this evening was an accident. He let that settle. I would prefer, he said carefully, that authenticity not involve direct impact in the future. A reasonable preference, she agreed. The door chimed softly, an alert that the next diplomatic course was about to begin. Thea straightened, the subtle glow beneath her skin intensifying as her public composure reassembled itself like layered armor. When she spoke again, the harmonic undertone returned, measured and regal. You will resume your duties, she said. Yes, Majesty. But you will also, she added, her ears tilting ever so slightly toward him, attend the smaller reception tomorrow evening. As a server. He blinked. Majesty. I find, she said, that gravity occasionally requires a second negotiation. For a moment he did not know whether this was mercy, punishment, or something far more complicated. Yes, Majesty, he managed. As he turned to leave, she spoke once more. Server Mitchell. He paused. Try not to redefine diplomatic protocol again tonight. I will make every effort, he said earnestly. When he stepped back into the Hall of Convergence, the hum of conversation washed over him once more. But something had shifted. The court still whispered. The chandeliers still hummed. The palace still calculated. Yet beneath it all, there lingered the faintest trace of something unplanned. And for the first time since he had set foot on Grandeur, Owen suspected that unpredictability might not be the most dangerous force in the room. By the following morning, Owen had achieved a new and entirely unwanted form of immortality. He learned this when his wrist console vibrated with a notification from the palace internal network. The message bore the polite heading, Incident Review, Stability Assessment. Beneath it was a short clip of him sliding in exaggerated slow motion, rendered by at least 3 different angles and one extremely dramatic orchestral overlay that he was fairly certain had not been present at the actual event. Someone had added subtitles. Observe the human's ritual of approach, one read. Owen groaned into his pillow. He had been assigned modest quarters along the outer curve of the palace ring, where gravity felt slightly more natural, and the windows offered a view of Grandeur's twin moons suspended like twin coins in a cosmic fountain. Normally he found the sight calming. Today they appeared to be watching him. He considered resigning. He considered faking a gravitational allergy. He considered transferring to asteroid catering, where the worst possible outcome was drifting gently into vacuum. Instead, he dressed. The smaller reception that evening was to be held in the observatory gallery, a chamber reserved for high-level discussions away from the full spectacle of the Hall of Convergence. Attendance would be limited. Senior delegates, key ministers, and, apparently, one human who had unintentionally redefined personal space. As he made his way through the corridors, he noticed that the palace seemed subtly aware of him. Wall displays flickered with polite informational feeds as he passed. A cleaning drone paused, rotated toward him, and emitted a brief trill that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Very funny, he muttered. The observatory gallery unfolded before him in a cascade of curved glass and suspended holography. The ceiling was transparent, revealing not just the sky, but a magnified projection of the orbital fleet, each vessel outlined in soft light. Star charts hovered mid-air, shifting as diplomatic borders recalibrated in real time. Queen Thea stood near the central projection, speaking quietly with a Varelian envoy whose bioluminescent patterns pulsed in thoughtful gradients. Her gown tonight was darker, threaded with constellations that aligned precisely with the stars above. Her long ears were angled slightly forward, attentive but not tense. Owen took his place near a refreshment console, this time triple-checking the floor for betrayal. He had just finished arranging a set of crystalline decanters when a voice spoke at his side. You are the gravitational emissary. He turned. One of the Kethri stood beside him, the shared exoskeletal shell gleaming under the starlight projection. Within the translucent cranial dome, the 4 individual entities rotated in slow, synchronized arcs. I am a server, Owen corrected. Correction acknowledged, they replied. However, your maneuver has shifted political momentum by approximately 2.3%. He blinked. What? The Queen's response altered perceived stability metrics. Displays of composure under irregular stimulus increased confidence indices. Owen stared at them. I slipped, he said. Precisely. Before he could decide whether this was a compliment or a warning, a subtle shift in the chamber's light signaled the Queen's attention. Server Mitchell, Thea called. Every nerve in his body aligned. He approached carefully, aware of the way certain ministers observed him, not with hostility, but with analytical interest. He felt like a data point that had sprouted limbs. You requested my presence, Majesty? He asked. I did. Her gaze flicked briefly to the holographic fleet above them. Tell me what you see. He hesitated. The fleet, he ventured? Yes. He looked upward. Dozens of vessels orbited Grandeur in precise formations, their gravitic sails faintly visible as shimmering distortions against the stars. "I see power," he said slowly, "and a lot of maintenance work." A faint ripple of amusement crossed her features. "Maintenance," she repeated. "Yes, Majesty. All of that alignment requires constant adjustment, micro-corrections. If even one ship drifts too far, the symmetry looks impressive, but becomes unstable." A senior minister nearby stiffened slightly. Thea's ears tilted subtly toward Owen. "And the negotiations?" she asked. He swallowed. There were safer topics. Weather, beverage temperature, the structural integrity of anti-spill technology. But she was watching him not as a ruler testing a subject, but as someone curious about the answer. "They feel similar," he said. "Everyone's trying to maintain formation. No one wants to drift first." The Varelian envoy emitted a soft hum. "And what would happen?" Thea asked. "If someone did?" "Depends," Owen replied. "If it's intentional, it's strategy. If it's accidental—" He paused, then added dryly, "Apparently it becomes legend." A few nearby aides struggled to maintain composure. Thea's gaze held his. "Your accident," she said evenly, "demonstrated that my authority does not fracture under disruption." "That wasn't my objective," he said quickly. "I am aware." Silence settled, but it was thoughtful rather than strained. She turned slightly, addressing the gathered delegates. "In diplomacy," she said, her voice carrying with controlled resonance, "we often confuse rigidity with strength." Her long ears angled outward, a gesture Owen was beginning to associate with deliberate openness. "Grandeur adjusts its gravity continuously," she continued. "We do not interpret these adjustments as weakness." The Kethri emitted a low, approving vibration. A minister cleared his throat. "Majesty, surely we are not equating statecraft with slipping." Thea's gaze flicked briefly to Owen. "Not slipping," she corrected. "Balancing." Owen felt heat rise in his face again, though less from embarrassment and more from the strange sensation of being included in something larger than his misstep. As discussions resumed, she stepped closer to him, lowering her voice. "You are uncomfortable," she observed. "I am surrounded by individuals who command fleets," he said quietly, "and holograms of my own humiliation." Her lips curved slightly. "Embarrassment is a remarkably democratic force," she said. "It spares no species." "Does it spare queens?" he asked before thinking. Her ears shifted, then settled. "No," she said softly. "It does not." He studied her more carefully then. Up close, beneath the composure, there were faint signs of fatigue at the edges of her eyes. The weight of expectation did not vanish simply because one laughed at an accident. "You handle it well," he said. "I have practice," she replied. A sudden fluctuation rippled through the holographic projection above them. One of the orbiting vessels flickered, its outline wavering. The chamber's light dimmed fractionally as the palace systems recalibrated. "Gravitic fluctuation," an aide murmured. Owen instinctively glanced upward. "Microdrift," he said. Thea's attention sharpened. Within seconds, the fleet's formation corrected itself, the wavering vessel sliding back into alignment. The disruption had been minor, almost invisible, but everyone had felt it. Thea exhaled slowly. "Maintenance," she murmured. He nodded. She looked at him again, not with the curiosity of a ruler examining an anomaly, but with something closer to recognition. "You see the adjustments," she said. "I drop things," he replied. "I've become very attentive to adjustments." This time her laughter was softer, almost private. The reception continued, negotiations weaving between trade clauses and strategic posturing. Yet beneath the formal language, something more flexible had entered the room. Owen found himself less rigid in his movements. He still checked the floor with near-paranoid vigilance, but he no longer felt like a walking catastrophe. He felt oddly like a participant. As the evening drew toward its close, the delegates dispersed in clusters of subdued conversation. Thea remained near the central projection, watching the fleet above. "You understand," she said quietly without turning, "that some will interpret my tolerance as vulnerability." "I understand," he replied. "And you?" He considered. "I think," he said slowly, that if an empire cannot survive a stumble, it was already falling. Her ears angled forward again. For a moment, the vast machinery of palace protocol seemed distant. It was simply two figures beneath a canopy of engineered stars, one crowned by expectation, the other by notoriety. "Server Mitchell," she said. "Yes, Majesty. Try not to stumble tomorrow." "I intend to retire undefeated," he replied. Her laughter echoed softly in the observatory gallery, blending with the hum of orbiting fleets and the quiet recalculations of a world that, despite all its precision, was learning to tolerate the unpredictable. And somewhere within that tolerance, something new was beginning to take shape. Grandeur did not forget. It archived. By the fourth day after the incident, Owen's slide had been analyzed in at least 6 different strategic contexts. He knew this because he had been politely summoned, not by the Queen this time, but by the Office of Symbolic Stability. The office was located in a quieter ring of the palace where gravity returned to standard, and the walls were lined with softly pulsing data veins. Each vein carried real-time social sentiment from across the planet and its orbital habitats. The colors shifted constantly: calm blues, cautious yellows, occasional flashes of argumentative red. Owen sat in a chair that adjusted itself every time he shifted, as if it distrusted his balance. Across from him, Minister Caldress folded his hands. Caldress was tall even by Grandeur's standards, his skin bearing faint geometric patterns that glowed when he was displeased. At present, the patterns were faintly orange. "Server Mitchell," Caldress began, voice smooth as polished alloy, "are you aware of your current approval metrics?" "I try not to have metrics," Owen said carefully. Caldress tapped the air. A holographic chart bloomed between them. A tiny human silhouette, unfortunately recognizable, was positioned beside a fluctuating graph. "You are trending upward," Caldress said. "I'm sorry," Owen replied automatically. Caldress's patterns flickered. "The populace interprets your interaction with Her Majesty as grounding." "I assure you I was quite ungrounded at the time." Caldress ignored that. "However, certain factions view this increased visibility as destabilizing." "Destabilizing?" Owen repeated. "I carry beverages." "You carry symbolism," Caldress corrected. Owen resisted the urge to ask whether symbolism required a uniform allowance. Her Majesty's composure under unexpected stimulus improved external confidence indices, Caldress continued, yet repeated irregularities could suggest erosion of hierarchy. "Are you suggesting I might trip again as a political maneuver?" Caldress regarded him with absolute seriousness. "That would be inadvisable." "Good," Owen said, "because my health insurance does not cover repeated historical moments." Caldress's glowing patterns dimmed slightly, perhaps in confusion. "You will attend this evening's council viewing," the minister said. "Observe only. Speak only if addressed." "That is my natural state," Owen assured him. When he left the office, he felt heavier than usual, though gravity had not changed. The palace corridors seemed more attentive, their embedded lights adjusting in quiet pulses as he passed. He found Queen Thea later that afternoon in the solar atrium, a vast chamber open to filtered starlight. Bioengineered trees arched overhead, their leaves composed of semi-transparent panels that converted light into data, as well as energy. Between them flowed a shallow channel of liquid silver, a cooling stream for the palace core. She stood at the edge of the channel, her reflection rippling in metallic waves. Without the full regalia of state, she wore a simpler garment, though even simplicity on Grandeur contained layers of advanced design. Her long ears angled back slightly, a sign Owen was beginning to recognize as contemplation. "You met with Caldress," she said without turning. "Yes, Majesty." "And?" "He informed me that I am trending." Her ears shifted faintly. "That word carries many implications," she said. "I am also destabilizing," he added helpfully. She glanced at him then, and for a heartbeat her composure slipped into something more personal, exasperation touched with amusement. "You are destabilizing only to those who believe stability requires rigidity," she said. "That sounds philosophical," he replied. "I was hoping for something less abstract, like invisibility." "Invisibility," she repeated. "You no longer desire it?" He considered. "I do," he said honestly, "but it appears invisibility is not compatible with trending." She stepped closer to the channel, dipping her fingers briefly into the liquid silver. It rippled outward in concentric circles that shimmered with faint equations. My court, she said quietly, has spent generations refining control, every gesture rehearsed, every response calculated. And then I arrived, Owen said. And then you slipped, she corrected. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. Caldress believes I should reduce your proximity, she continued, to restore perceived hierarchy. Reduce proximity, Owen echoed. That sounds safer for both of us. She looked at him directly now. Do you believe our conversations are unsafe? He hesitated. Politically? He asked. Yes, probably. And personally? The question settled between them like a suspended star. I don't know, he admitted. Her ears angled forward again, attentive. That uncertainty, she said softly, is precisely what my court finds threatening. A subtle vibration passed through the atrium floor, the palace core adjusting perhaps, or the planet itself negotiating with its moons. Tonight, she continued, the council will debate the final gravitic sale clause. And I will observe only, he said dutifully. She studied him for a moment longer. Unless, she added, I address you. Owen felt his pulse quicken. Majesty, I am uniquely unqualified to address interstellar propulsion treaties. You are uniquely unpracticed in pretense, she replied. He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. In the council chamber that evening, gravity was precisely calibrated to standard. No slips, no condensation. The chamber was circular, tiered with seats that adjusted to the anatomy of each species present. Above, a holographic model of a gravitic sail unfolded in luminous detail, its curves bending simulated spacetime in elegant arcs. Owen stood along the outer ring, hands clasped behind his back. The debate began in measured tones, licensing percentages, territorial rights, symbolic acknowledgments of technological contribution. Voices rose and fell, never quite crossing into open hostility but skirting its edges. Then came the clause. A Varelian delegate proposed an amendment requiring public recognition of their superiority in sail calibration algorithms. The Dominion objected, citing shared research. Tension thickened. The holographic sail flickered as projected scenarios recalculated. In one model, alliance strengthened. In another, fleets drifted apart. Thea remained still at the center. Pride, Caldress murmured from his seat, barely audible. The argument intensified. Metrics on the chamber walls shifted from blue to amber. And then Thea spoke. Her voice carried without amplification. We are discussing propulsion, she said evenly. Not ego. A ripple moved through the chamber. She turned slightly. Server Mitchell. Every eye followed her gaze. Owen felt the familiar sensation of gravity misbehaving, though it remained perfectly stable. Yes, Majesty, he managed. Explain microdrift. He blinked. Majesty? You observed it in the fleet. Silence stretched. He swallowed. Microdrift, he said slowly, aware of hundreds of listening ears, some long, some luminous, some armored, is a minor deviation from formation. It's not catastrophic on its own. But if ignored, it accumulates. The holographic sail adjusted, showing faint misalignments. If one vessel refuses correction because it wants to appear strong, he continued, surprising himself with steadiness, the entire formation eventually destabilizes. A hush settled. Correction, he added, is not weakness, it's maintenance. The chamber lights shifted back toward cooler tones. The Varelian delegate hesitated. The Dominion representative recalculated. Thea's ears angled outward in deliberate openness. Maintenance, she repeated softly. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then gradually the amendment was withdrawn. Negotiations resumed, this time less rigid. Owen exhaled slowly, only now realizing how tightly he had been holding himself. As the session concluded, murmurs spread, not of scandal, but of adjustment. When the chamber emptied, Thea approached him. You did not slip, she said. High traction floor, he replied faintly. Her gaze softened. You understand now, she said, why Caldress is concerned. Yes, and you. He considered the holographic sail still bending luminous space above them. I think, he said carefully, that if maintenance frightens them, perhaps they were drifting already. Her ears tilted sideways, a gesture he had come to recognize as quiet approval. Grandeur does not forget, she said. No, he replied. It archives. A faint smile curved her lips. Then let it archive this, she said. And for the first time since his ill-fated slide, Owen realized that the destabilizing force within the palace was not gravity, it was honesty. By the time the Gravitic Sale Treaty entered its final drafting phase, Owen had developed a new and deeply inconvenient talent. People asked his opinion. He noticed it first in small ways. A junior aide paused beside him in the corridor and casually inquired, hypothetically, if two fleets disagreed about trajectory, would humor be considered a stabilizing variable? A Varelian delegate, glowing faintly turquoise in thought, asked whether humans often resolve disputes by colliding first and negotiating later. I do not recommend that strategy, Owen had replied. My ribs still remember it. Grandeur, ever observant, adjusted around these interactions. The palace lighting seemed to warm slightly when he entered shared spaces, as though acknowledging that unpredictability had become part of its architectural plan. That afternoon, Queen Thea summoned him not to a council chamber, but to the orbital garden. The garden existed in partial vacuum, shielded by a translucent energy membrane that shimmered like a soap bubble the size of a cathedral. Within it, plant life from across the Concord grew in carefully regulated microclimates. Some leaves refracted light into mathematical patterns. Others pulsed gently, communicating with root systems embedded in soil that was more data than dirt. Owen stepped through the membrane and felt the faint pressure shift around his skin. Artificial gravity here was softer, closer to the lighter setting of the Hall of Convergence, but balanced perfectly. Thea stood beside a spiral vine whose blossoms emitted low-frequency harmonic tones. Her gown was a deep blue threaded with silver circuitry, less ceremonial than council attire, but still unmistakably regal. Her long ears angled slightly outward as she listened to the plant's resonance. You wish to see me, Majesty? Owen asked. I wish to avoid the wall, she replied. He glanced around. The walls are very nice. They record everything. He blinked. You mean metaphorically? No. He considered this. That explains the cleaning drone. She almost smiled. The treaty approaches completion, she said. The final clause concerns co-development rights. Shared credit, he said. Yes. She stepped along the curved path, and he followed at a respectful distance that had become less formal over the past days. Caldrus believes a public reaffirmation of hierarchy will reassure the more conservative ministers, she continued. A gesture of distance between us. Owen's stomach performed a subtle microdrift. Distance, he repeated. Yes. That sounds strategically sensible. And you, she asked. He hesitated. The garden hummed faintly around them, blossoms releasing brief flares of bioluminescence, as if reacting to emotional frequencies. I understand the optics, he said carefully. You are a queen. I am very much not. You are, she corrected softly, a participant. That may be the problem. She stopped walking. Why? He exhaled slowly. Because participation implies equality of perspective. Not authority, not rank, but perspective. And that unsettles people who prefer clean lines. Her ears tilted forward. Do you feel unsettled? She asked. Yes, he said honestly, but not because of you. She studied him in silence. The light filtering through the membrane above cast shifting constellations across her face. You fear becoming a symbol again, she said. I fear becoming useful in the wrong way. A faint vibration rippled through the garden as orbital stabilizers adjusted outside the membrane. She resumed walking. My people, she said, revere control. We design our children's education around predictive modeling. We simulate crises before they occur. We rarely allow unscripted variables. And then I slid across the floor, he said. And then you slid, she agreed. They reached a clearing at the center of the garden. Suspended above it was a miniature projection of the Gravitic Sale, its curved surface bending a delicate model of spacetime. The projection flickered, displaying two possible outcomes. One in which development rights were shared equally, another in which grandeur retains symbolic primacy. Both models are viable, she said, but only one feels honest, he replied. She turned to him. Honesty is not always politically efficient. No, he agreed, but efficiency without trust is maintenance without correction. Her ears shifted, subtle and quick. You learn quickly, she observed. I am highly motivated to avoid further historic incidents. A faint laugh escaped her. Silence settled again, but it was not strained. It was contemplative. You are aware, she said after a moment, that certain factions believe you influence me. I influence you. He stared at her. Majesty, I struggle to influence the beverage temperature. They perceive your presence as grounding. That word again. It is not an insult. I know. He rubbed the back of his neck. It just feels heavier than a tray. She stepped closer to the projection. The sail shimmered, bending the miniature star field in elegant arcs. If I choose equal development rights, she said, it will signal flexibility. Some will interpret it as weakness. And if you choose primacy, he asked, it will signal strength. Some will interpret it as fear. He considered the two projections. What do you interpret it as? She asked. He hesitated. I interpret primacy as maintenance of perception, he said slowly, and equality as maintenance of reality. The blossoms around them pulsed softly, as though approving the phrasing. She regarded him for a long moment. You speak as though you have ruled, she said. I have supervised a dessert station, he replied. The principles are similar. Credit must be shared or resentment ferments. Her laughter this time was unguarded. You compare interstellar propulsion to pastry. Both require balance, he said. A chime echoed faintly through the garden membrane, an incoming communication from the council chamber. It is time, she said. They walked back toward the membrane together. Caldrus will expect visible distance, she said quietly. Owen nodded. Then give him distance, he replied, but not dishonesty. She paused at the edge of the membrane. You accept the consequences? She asked. I slipped once, he said. I can withstand a little drift. Her ears angled forward, then outward. When they entered the council chamber, the atmosphere was taut but controlled. Delegates waited, posture aligned with expectation. Thea took her place at the center. Owen remained at the periphery. The final clause, she began, her voice resonant and steady, will recognize shared development rights between Grandeur and the Varelian collective. A murmur rippled outward. In propulsion, she continued, no vessel achieves momentum alone. The holographic sail above them shifted to the model of shared curvature. Maintenance, she added softly, requires correction. Caldrus's geometric patterns flickered amber, then gradually cooled toward blue. The Varelian envoy emitted a low harmonic of approval. The clause passed. Applause followed, not thunderous, but genuine. Owen felt something loosen in his chest. As the chamber dispersed, Caldrus approached him. You are still destabilizing, the minister said. Owen braced. But perhaps, Caldrus added, stability benefits from occasional recalibration. That is the most comforting near accusation I have ever received, Owen replied. Later, as the palace lights dimmed into evening mode, Owen found himself once more beneath the engineered sky of Grandeur. The twin moons hung steady. He felt no urge to hide. Thea joined him at the terrace overlooking the luminous ocean far below. The water glowed faintly from bioluminescent currents guided by orbital tides. It is done, she said. Yes, Majesty. She studied the horizon. You were correct, she said. About pastry? About reality. He allowed himself a small smile. I would prefer, he said, that future diplomatic shifts not require physical impact. She glanced at him, amusement flickering. Agreed. They stood in companionable silence. Grandeur continued its calculations. Fleets maintained formation. The treaty archived itself into planetary memory. And somewhere between protocol and unpredictability, between queen and server, a new alignment settled. Not rigid, not rehearsed, but balanced. Grandeur began to whisper again, not loudly. Grandeur was never loud unless calibrated to be. Its whispers moved through encrypted channels, through advisory councils, through social metrics that pulsed behind palace walls like a second nervous system. Owen could not hear the data directly, but he felt its effects in the way conversations paused when he entered a corridor, in the way certain ministers studied him as though calculating gravitational impact. The treaty had been signed. The shared gravitic sail initiative was already generating optimistic projections. Fleets recalibrated with new algorithmic harmonies. Public confidence metrics glowed a healthy blue. And yet, instability did not always mean chaos. Sometimes it meant change. Owen discovered this when his wrist console chimed with a summons marked urgent, High Council review. He stared at it for several seconds, hoping it might reclassify itself as urgent. Lunch menu adjustment. It did not. The High Council chamber was colder than the others, both in temperature and atmosphere. The architecture here was severe. Clean lines of dark alloy and suspended geometric constructs that rotated slowly, tracking planetary stability indices. Gravity was set precisely at standard, perhaps as a symbolic reminder that here, no one was permitted to drift. Owen stood at the outer edge of the chamber once more, hands clasped, pulse steady only through sheer stubbornness. At the center, Queen Thea sat upon the circular dais, not elevated, but unmistakably central. Her gown tonight was stark white, threaded with faint iridescent lines. Like star proximity, he said, voice measured. Has proximity, he said, voice measured, has coincided with significant policy shifts. Owen resisted the urge to glance behind him, just in case another human had wandered in accidentally. These shifts, Caldress continued, have thus far produced favorable outcomes. However, precedent is forming. One of the senior counselors leaned forward, their crystalline skin refracting the chamber lights. Precedent of what? Accessibility, Caldress replied. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Owen cleared his throat softly. It was not meant to be audible. It was. Several heads turned. Thea's gaze flicked toward him briefly. Unreadable. Server Mitchell, Caldress said evenly, do you consider your current level of engagement appropriate to your station? The question settled heavily. Owen inhaled. No, he said. The chamber stilled. Caldress' geometric patterns flared faintly in surprise. Explain, the minister demanded. I do not consider it appropriate, Owen continued carefully, that I have been asked for input on propulsion treaties. A faint wave of approval shimmered through a few council members. But, he added, I also did not request it. Silence. Thea's ears shifted slightly forward. I have no ambition beyond performing my assigned duties competently, Owen said, preferably without further collision. A faint, unwilling twitch of amusement crossed one counselor's features. Yet you continue to speak, Caldress observed. Because I am addressed, Owen replied. And when addressed, silence would be conspicuous. A crystalline counselor tilted their head. You imply your influence is reactive, not intentional. Yes. And if we restricted your access? Another asked. Owen hesitated. I would return to beverage logistics, he said, which I assure you is less controversial. Thea finally spoke. Influence, she said, voice calm but resonant, is not measured by proximity alone. Her gaze swept the chamber. Server Mitchell has offered perspective when requested. He has not sought authority. Caldress inclined his head slightly. Majesty, perception does not always distinguish between seeking and receiving. The geometric constructs overhead rotated more rapidly, as if mirroring the rising tension. Owen felt the air tighten. Then perhaps, he said carefully, the issue is not my presence, but the discomfort with unscripted variables. Several counselors stiffened. Thea's eyes sharpened. You presume much, one of the elders said. I presume nothing, Owen replied quickly. I observe. Grandeur is engineered for predictability. When something unpredictable yields positive results, it challenges design assumptions. The chamber's lighting shifted subtly, cooling. Are you suggesting, Caldress asked, that our governance is overly rigid? Owen swallowed. I am suggesting, he said slowly, that rigidity without adjustment leads to fracture. The words hung there, fragile and undeniable. Thea rose from the dais. Her movement was unhurried, deliberate. If our empire cannot withstand the presence of a human server, she said evenly, then our stability is illusory. Her long ears angled outward in unmistakable declaration. The treaty succeeded not because hierarchy was diminished, she continued, but because honesty was permitted. A ripple of quiet resistance moved through the chamber. And honesty, she added, is not the exclusive domain of rank. Caldress regarded her steadily. No one questions your authority, Majesty, he said. We question the narrative forming around it. And what narrative is that, she asked? That you are approachable. The word landed awkwardly. Thea's expression did not harden. It clarified. If approachability undermines authority, she said softly, then authority is fragile indeed. The geometric constructs slowed their rotation. Owen felt something shift, not in the chamber's gravity, but in its orientation. A crystalline elder leaned back. The human remains, they said at last, but with defined boundaries. Caldress inclined his head. Thea's gaze flicked briefly toward Owen. Defined boundaries, she echoed. The session adjourned. As council members dispersed, murmuring in controlled tones, Owen remained still until only Thea and Caldress lingered. Caldress approached him. You are not exiled, the minister said. That is reassuring, Owen replied faintly, but your access to council proceedings will be limited. Also reassuring, Owen said. I find propulsion debates taxing. Caldress studied him for a moment longer. You understand, he said, that symbols are rarely permitted to remain ordinary. I am aggressively ordinary, Owen replied. A faint flicker, perhaps the ghost of a smile, crossed Caldress's patterned skin. Maintain that, the minister said, then departed. Silence settled. Thea stepped down from the dais. You are displeased, she observed. I am relieved, Owen admitted, and slightly embarrassed. Embarrassment appears to follow you, she said lightly. It has become a loyal companion. She stopped before him. They will watch you more closely now, she said. They already were. Yes, but now with structure. He considered that. Boundaries, he said. Boundaries, she agreed. The chamber lights dimmed into evening mode, casting soft constellations across the dark alloy walls. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. The treaty? He replied. No, the shift. He thought carefully. I regret that honesty unsettles, he said. But I do not regret speaking it. Her ears angled forward again. Nor do I, she said. They walked together out of the chamber, not side by side in visible solidarity, but not distant either, an equilibrium carefully maintained. Outside, Grandeur's sky shimmered with controlled auroras. Fleets held formation. The shared gravitic sail initiative broadcast its first cooperative test run, bending space-time in flawless arcs. Owen glanced upward. No slipping, he murmured. Thea followed his gaze. Not tonight, she replied. And though boundaries had been drawn, though scrutiny had intensified, something remained unfractured. Grandeur had recalibrated. And this time, it had done so consciously. The first cooperative gravitic sail test was scheduled at dawn. Grandeur's sky shimmered in layered auroras as orbital platforms aligned in silent precision. The twin moons hovered like attentive witnesses, their reflected light gliding across the palace spires. Every major species of the Concorde tuned into the broadcast. Metrics pulsed through the planet's nervous system, confidence indices, stability projections, predictive models branching into luminous possibilities. Owen stood on the eastern observation terrace, precisely 3 steps behind the designated non-symbolic boundary marker Caldress had very thoughtfully installed. He appreciated the marker. It was a thin band of light embedded in the floor, subtle, firm, politely restrictive. I have been officially demoted to decorative distance, he murmured to himself. You requested normalcy, Queen Thea said from beside him. He hadn't heard her approach. He rarely did. She wore formal regalia this morning, crown integrated seamlessly into her dark hair, its structure composed of adaptive alloys that refracted the rising light. Her gown shimmered with constellations corresponding to the newly charted trade quarters. Her long ears angled forward, alert but not tense. I requested fewer council debates, he corrected. This is manageable. Below them, the ocean glowed faintly with guided bioluminescent currents. Above, the fleet began its synchronized maneuver. 2 vessels, one Grandeur, one Virelian, shifted formation first. Their sails unfolded in perfect mirrored arcs, translucent membranes bending microcurrents in spacetime. The distortion shimmered like heat above desert stone, except it curved stars. Maintenance in action, Owen said quietly. Yes, Thea replied. The vessels accelerated without conventional thrust, drawn forward by the sculpted fabric of space itself. The projection screens across the palace displayed telemetry, energy stability within acceptable margins, shared algorithmic harmonics synchronized. No microdrift, no prideful deviation. The council chamber's tension of previous days felt distant now, like a storm that had recalibrated into weather. Caldrus sent a message this morning, Thea said. Owen braced instinctively. He has recommended the creation of a new civilian advisory program, she continued. Rotational, cross-species. Owen blinked. That sounds dangerously inclusive. It is, she agreed. And I am not on it? He asked carefully. She glanced at him, amusement flickering. You are not, he exhaled in relief. However, she added, your initial observations are cited in its framework. He closed his eyes briefly. I will never escape the archive. Grandeur does not forget, she reminded him gently. It archives, he said. They fell into companionable silence as the vessels completed their first arc and stabilized into sustained glide. Applause echoed faintly from observation balconies across the palace. The test was a success. Caldrus joined them on the terrace, remaining just outside the boundary marker. Telemetry confirms optimal curvature, he said. His geometric skin patterns glowed a calm blue. That is encouraging, Owen replied. Caldrus regarded him for a moment. Your influence metrics have normalized, the minister said. I am delighted to be statistically unremarkable. There remains, Caldrus continued, a cultural reference circulating among junior academies. Owen's stomach tightened. They reenact the incident as a lesson in adaptive governance. Owen stared at him. Do they at least improve my posture? Caldrus' patterns flickered faintly. They exaggerate it. Of course they do. Thea's laughter was quiet but unmistakable. The narrative, Caldrus went on, frames the event not as disrespect, but as the moment grandeur demonstrated resilience. Owen absorbed that slowly. I slipped, he said again, almost reflexively, and we adjusted, Thea replied. Caldrus inclined his head to the Queen, then withdrew. The fleet above completed its final, synchronized turn and returned to stable orbit. Shared propulsion algorithms locked into long-term exchange protocols. The treaty's success was no longer theoretical. On the terrace, the auroras brightened, responding to the increased orbital energy flow. You are different, Thea said quietly. Owen looked at her. I haven't collided with anything in days. That is not what I mean. He leaned against the terrace railing, careful not to cross the boundary marker. I suppose, he said slowly, I no longer feel invisible. Her ears angled forward. Is that unwelcome? He considered the question honestly. I thought invisibility was safety, he said, but it was also absence. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint hum of distant fleet engines harmonizing. I do not wish to be a symbol, he continued, but I do not mind being present. Thea studied him in the soft morning light. Presence, she said, is not hierarchy. No, he agreed, it's participation. A comfortable quiet settled between them. I will continue to serve, he said after a moment. Carry trays, avoid condensation. An admirable ambition. But, he added, if addressed, I will answer. Her gaze warmed. I would expect nothing less. Below, palace staff began preparing for the public celebration. Banners of light unfurled along the terraces. Projection drones traced the arc of the successful sail maneuver across the sky in luminous patterns. Owen watched the display. Do you ever wish, he asked carefully, that you could walk through these corridors without calculation? Her ears shifted, forward then slightly to the side. Yeah, she said. And can you? Rarely, he nodded. Then perhaps, he said, we both negotiate gravity. She regarded him thoughtfully. Perhaps we do. A projection drone drifted slightly off course above them, its light pattern wobbling. Owen pointed upward instinctively. Microdrift. The drone corrected immediately, returning to symmetrical alignment. Thea smiled faintly. Maintenance, she said. He smiled back. The celebration unfolded without incident. Speeches were delivered. Metrics glowed reassuringly blue. No one slipped. Later, as the terraces emptied and the palace lights dimmed into evening mode, Owen found himself alone at the edge of the observation ring. He looked down at the boundary marker. It glowed softly, unthreatening. He stepped back from it, not crossing it, not testing it. For the first time since arriving on Grandeur, he did not feel defined by that line. Footsteps approached. Thea joined him once more. Crown removed, hair loosened slightly by the evening breeze. The fleet will depart at first light tomorrow, she said. Yes, Majesty. You will remain. Yes. She studied the horizon. Do you regret not returning to invisibility? She asked. He thought of the council chamber, the orbital garden, the observatory gallery. He thought of the moment when an entire hall had frozen and a queen had chosen concern over punishment. No, he said quietly. I do not. Her ears angled forward, then outward. Nor do I, she replied. The twin moons rose higher, steady and luminous. Grandeur's systems continued their endless calculations. Fleets maintained formation. Treaties archived themselves into planetary memory. And on the terrace of a world engineered for perfection, a human who had once wished to disappear stood firmly in place, not as a symbol, not as a disruption, but as a participant in something larger than protocol. He had slipped. He had survived. And in the adjustment that followed, an empire had learned that stability was not the absence of imbalance, but the courage to correct it. No one froze anymore. And that, Owen thought, was progress.